Walter Hayes had lived on the same quiet road for more than 50 years, long enough to watch generations grow up, new houses replace old ones, and yet somehow his world had remained frozen, as if time respected only him. Every morning followed the same ritual. The soft creak of the porch steps beneath his feet, the warmth of coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, the distant sound of birds greeting the sunrise. To any passerby, he might have seemed content, the very picture of small-town peace. But those who truly knew him or who had known him would have seen the undercurrent, a quiet, almost imperceptible ache that lingered beneath his calm exterior. He had once understood every corner of his life with certainty. Every hammer in the workshop had a familiar weight. Every floorboard groan, accompanying rhythm. Every neighbor's face, a story in itself. Even the patterns of seasons carried meaning. The way frost crystallized on a garden gate, or how sunlight hit the old maple tree in the afternoon, casting the perfect shadow for him to rest beneath. Life had been slow, and he had thrived in its measured cadence. Each day a gentle step forward rather than a frantic sprint. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world shifted. Technology arrived like a tidal wave, carried with it new languages, new rhythms, new forms of human connection, or what was now called connection. Smartphones replaced conversations. Emails replaced letters. Notifications replaced the subtle pulse of a neighbor's knock at the door. Walter tried. He really did. He tried to understand these new ways of communicating, these glowing rectangles and tiny buttons. But each attempt left him more aware of the distance growing between himself and the world. Mistyped passwords, confusing apps, and endless updates reminded him that the landscape he once knew had quietly vanished. And it wasn't just technology. It was the people. Children no longer played in yards, their faces bent toward screens instead of toward each other. Neighbors no longer gathered on porches to watch the sunset together. Even his own family, grown, busy, distracted, texted rather than visited. Walter sometimes imagined himself invisible, a ghost moving through the hallways of a world that no longer had room for him. Inside his modest house, walls lined with photographs, memories lived in suspended animation. Old black and white portraits stared at him, telling stories of a life vibrant and full, yet somehow unreachable. Sunday dinners with laughter spilling over the edges of the table, long drives down country roads with the radio humming softly in the background, late-night conversations that stretched into the dawn. These were no longer part of his life. And the hardest part, Walter realized, was not that the world had changed, but that he felt left behind by the choices he had made, the moments he had let slip by. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Walter would sit on the porch and let the memories wash over him. The world beyond his yard moved in fast, bright streaks. Cars rushing, people walking with heads bowed to glowing screens, time racing ahead without pause. And he, steadfast in his rhythms, watched and wondered if the life he understood had quietly disappeared forever. On the table beside him rested a leather-bound photo album he rarely opened. Its cover was worn, the edges softened by decades of handling. But tonight, something compelled him to reach for it. Perhaps it was a gentle ache of loneliness, or perhaps an invisible hand from the past beckoning him. Opening it, the first page revealed a photograph that made his chest tighten, a younger version of himself, smiling with reckless certainty, standing beside a woman whose eyes seemed to hold the world. That image, so vivid and alive, reminded him of all that had been lost, and of choices that could never be taken back. Walter's hands trembled as he lingered over the photo. Memories cascaded through him. Laughter, arguments, promises whispered in the quiet of night, and that single moment he would give anything to revisit. A sigh escaped him, heavy with longing and regret. For the first time in many years, he whispered aloud, the words breaking through the silence like a fragile bird. I wish I could go back, just once, to fix what I broke. He closed the album slowly, clutching it against his chest. There was a stirring within him, a tiny, insistent spark of determination that had lain dormant for decades. The world he belonged to had slipped away. But perhaps, just perhaps, a fragment of that life could be reclaimed. The past was calling. And Walter Hayes, alone on his quiet porch, felt the unmistakable pull to answer. The next morning, Walter awoke with a restlessness he hadn't felt in years. The kind of restlessness that tugged at the edges of his mind, whispering that something he had buried long ago was stirring again. He lingered at the breakfast table longer than usual, his coffee growing cold in the chipped ceramic mug he had used for decades. The aroma of the brew, faint and comforting, seemed to ground him for a moment, yet the ache remained, something old yet urgent calling to him. Finally, he rose, moving through the house as he always did, until the old workshop behind the house beckoned. He hadn't been inside for months, perhaps years. The door creaked in protest as he opened it, revealing the familiar scent of sawdust, oil, and memories long untouched. Sunlight slanted through the dusty windows, illuminating the scattered tools and workbenches that had once been his sanctuary. Each object seemed to hum with stories from the past, echoes of days when life was slower, when he felt competent and certain. Walter ran his fingers across the smooth surface of a worn workbench, recalling the hours he had spent here building, fixing, creating. He remembered the rhythm of his life, the satisfaction of a task completed, the pride in work done with his own hands. But amid the nostalgia, a nagging sensation gnawed at him, a pull towards something he could not yet name. His gaze fell on a small, neglected drawer tucked beneath the bench, a drawer he had not opened in decades. For reasons he could not explain, he felt compelled to kneel before it and slide it open. Dust rose in lazy motes, catching the sunlight like tiny golden specks. Among the old screws, nails, and yellowed receipts, something caught his eye, an envelope worn and brittle with age. His heart quickened. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Clara, the name alone struck him with a force that left him breathless. Clara, the first love he had ever known, the woman who had captured his heart with a quiet smile and a strength he could never match. She had been the center of his young world, the one he had promised to love, yet the one he had walked away from in a moment of foolish pride. Walter's hands trembled as he lifted the envelope. Memories flooded him unbidden. Laughter shared on warm summer evenings, long walks beneath the shade of maples, evenings spent leaning on each other's arms, imagining a future together. And then, that night, so long ago, yet still vivid, the night he had let anger and stubbornness dictate his choice. He had walked away, convinced he had time to apologize, to explain, to make things right. But life, in its relentless forward motion, had offered no second chance. He slid the envelope from the drawer, feeling the brittle paper against his palm. He could almost hear Clara's voice, soft and patient, calling to him across the years. His chest tightened. A part of him had tried to forget her, to bury the guilt, to convince himself that it was merely youthful folly. But the envelope had undone all his defenses. Walter sank onto the old wooden stool beside the workbench, staring at the envelope as if it might speak to him directly. His fingers traced the edges of the paper. He could see the faint creases where it had been folded, the slight fading of ink from decades of storage. The past, it seemed, had found a way to reach him. He remembered the promise he had broken, the promise to be honest, to be present, to cherish what they had before pride drove him away. He had married someone else, built a life that was steady, comfortable, but incomplete. And Clara had moved on, though the thought of her lingering care now struck him with a pang of guilt he could hardly bear. Walter whispered to himself, voice cracking, "If only I could go back, if only I hadn't walked away that night." The room felt impossibly quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dust particles floated lazily through the shafts of sunlight, and somewhere in the distance, a bird's song reminded him that life continued, relentless and indifferent. But inside the small workshop, time seemed to bend, the decades folding over themselves until he was a young man again. Standing outside Clara's door, heart pounding, hands empty of courage, he pressed the envelope to his chest. It was more than paper. It was a chance, a fragile, trembling opportunity to face a past he had long avoided. Walter understood, in that quiet moment, that the world outside could wait. The rushing traffic, the glowing screens, the rapid march of technology, they were irrelevant compared to the echo of a single choice made so long ago. Finally, he stood, slowly, letting the stool scrape against the wooden floor. The envelope remained clutched in his hand, a weight and a guide at once. He felt the stirrings of purpose, a determination that had lain dormant for decades. He would go. He would see Clara, or whatever remained of her world, and he would face the consequences of his absence. Walter took a deep breath, letting the scent of sawdust and age would fill his lungs. He whispered again, with a trembling certainty, "I have to make this right, even if I'm too late." Outside, the wind rustled to the cornfields, carrying with the faint sound a world moving forward, unhurried by regrets, yet offering space for redemption to those willing to seek it. And Walter Hayes, holding the envelope that had bridged decades, felt the first tremors of a journey that would confront time, guilt, and love in equal measure. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not in the life he had, but in the one he had almost lost. Walter Hayes hadn't driven past the county line in years. The very thought of venturing beyond the familiar fields and winding roads had once felt unnecessary, even intimidating. But today was different. Today, the envelope clutched in his jacket pocket weighed heavier than any tool he had ever held. It was more than paper. It was the echo of a choice, a doorway into the past that refused to let him rest. He climbed into his old blue pickup truck, its seat worn and familiar, the leather cracked in places from decades of use. The engine coughed to life, a stubborn, reluctant rumble that reminded him of mornings long past. For a moment he sat there, hands gripping the wheel, listening to the steady hum of the engine beneath him. The familiar scent of leather, oil, and the faint tang of the morning air mingled in the cab. This was his world, and yet he was leaving it behind, stepping into a past that had never truly left him. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt flanked by fields of golden corn swaying in the wind. Walter drove slowly, savoring each turn, each familiar landmark, as memories pressed against him like the weight of a tide. He remembered long drives he had taken with Clara, the radio playing softly in the background, windows down, hair whipping in the breeze. They had laughed at everything and nothing, the kind of laughter that lingers long after the sound fades. And then the arguments, the stubborn silences, the prideful words, and the night he had walked away. He pressed a hand to his chest as if to contain the ache. But the heart has a way of demanding acknowledgement. The world outside blurred, but the memories were sharp, as clear as the morning sun glinting off the cornfields. Every mile he drove pulled him closer to Clara and closer to the confrontation he had feared for decades. As he neared the small town, the buildings began to look familiar. A diner with peeling paint, a gas station with a faded sign, a narrow bridge over a quiet stream where he had once stopped with Clara to skip stones. The nostalgia was almost unbearable, yet he welcomed it. It reminded him he was still capable of feeling, of caring, of loving. Walter pulled into the diner's parking lot, the truck rattling slightly as he came to a stop. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, the smell of coffee, fried eggs, and old linoleum greeting him. The waitress behind the counter looked up and offered a polite, curious smile. "Morning, sir. Just coffee." He nodded, taking a seat by the window. Sunlight streamed in, catching the dust motes in the air, making them shimmer like tiny golden lanterns. Walter placed the envelope on the table in front of him, hands trembling slightly. He had carried it all this way, yet now, faced with the moment, he hesitated. For decades, he had imagined what he would say, how he would move, how he would find her. But reality had a way of silencing even the most prepared. The waitress returned with a steaming mug, setting it down gently. "You all right, sir? You look distant." Walter managed a small, ironic smile. "Just try and find a way to fix something I should have fixed long ago." She nodded knowingly, as if she understood the weight he carried. "It's never too late, not for the heart," she said softly, then walked away. Her words, simple and unassuming, settled into him like rain soaking dry earth. He finally opened the envelope. The paper was yellowed, its edges brittle, yet the handwriting remained unmistakable. Clara's words leapt off the page, still gentle, still alive. "Walter, you walked away angry, but I never stopped caring. If you ever want to talk, you know where my mother's house is. I'll wait a little while." There was no anger, no resentment, just love, quiet and patient, waiting like a lantern in the dark. Walter's breath caught. For decades, he had imagined confrontation, recrimination, heartbreak. But this was not what awaited him. This was hope, delicate and fragile, but real. Tears blurred his vision as he folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest. He whispered aloud, voice thick with emotion, "I'm coming, Clara, even if all that's left is the memory of you." He stepped back into the truck, the engine's familiar rumble comforting in its steadiness. The miles stretched ahead, each one a step closer to the town where she had lived, to the porch where she might still sit in memory, to the reckoning he could no longer avoid. The landscape rolled by, cornfields giving way to small homes and quiet streets, the world moving in slow, deliberate rhythms. As he drove, Walter reflected on the years lost, the words unsaid, the touches denied, the laughter and love left behind. The road before him felt symbolic, not just a physical journey, but an emotional one, a path toward confronting the man he had once been and the man he hoped to become. Each mile brought him closer to the truth he had avoided for decades, yet the fear remained. Could he face it? Could he survive the sight of what time had taken? The sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the truck hood, over his hands gripping the steering wheel, over the road that would soon bring him face to face with the past. Walter's heart thumped steadily, not from the speed, not from the driving, but from anticipation, hope, and the fragile possibility of redemption. And though the envelope remained folded in his jacket pocket, it pulsed with the weight of decades, a tangible reminder that the past was not gone, only waiting. Walter Hayes, a man long accustomed to life's quiet routines, was now driving toward the one confrontation he could never have imagined in his ordinary days. He was driving toward Clara, toward truth, and toward a possibility of healing that had eluded him for more than 40 years. Every turn of the wheel, every mile passing beneath the tires, brought clarity. The journey wasn't just to find her, it was to face himself, to acknowledge regrets, to embrace courage, and to discover that even after decades, some doors could still be opened. And so, Walter drove on, heart pounding, eyes focused, spirit trembling yet resolute. The journey had begun, and nothing would turn him back. Walter Hayes' truck rolled slowly down the narrow road, the asphalt uneven beneath its tires. The town felt smaller than he remembered, quiet and almost untouched by the frantic pace of the outside world. As he turned onto a familiar street, he saw the old white farmhouse looming ahead. Its paint, once bright and proud, had faded with the years, peeling slightly in the sun's morning light. The porch sagged under the weight of time, but it was still there, the same place where Clara had once sat, waiting, reading, and dreaming. Walter's heart thumped wildly. For decades, he had imagined this moment in countless ways, confronting anger, begging forgiveness, confessing his failures. But now that it was real, the anticipation felt heavier, almost unbearable. He parked the truck at the edge of the gravel driveway, resting his hands on the steering wheel, as if it were a lifeline. The envelope still lay in his jacket pocket, a fragile bridge between past and present. He stepped out, the morning air cool against his skin, carried with it the scent of grass, earth, and wildflowers that had grown untended along the fence line. Walter walked slowly toward the porch, each step deliberate, each movement echoing decades of hesitation. His mind raced, imagining Clara waiting there, smiling or scolding, or perhaps staring at him with disappointment. Before he reached the porch, an elderly woman emerged from the neighboring house, her presence quiet yet grounding. She regarded him with knowing eyes, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "You looking for Clara?" she asked softly. Walter nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, I'm Walter Hayes." The woman's smile faded slightly, touched by sorrow. "Oh, Walter, I see. She passed 3 years ago, peacefully in her sleep." The words hit him like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of grief across every part of him. His knees weakened, and he sank onto the edge of the porch step, gripping the wooden railing for support. He had imagined so many endings to this story, but none had included silence. None had included absence. He felt the weight of decades pressing down on his chest, a suffocating mix of regret, longing, and guilt. The woman continued, her voice gentle yet steady. "She always hoped, Someone from her past might come around someday. She had a quiet heart. Walter loved more than she let anyone know. Walter closed his eyes, letting the wind carry away the sharp ache in his chest. He could almost see her sitting here, the gentle tilt of her head, the soft curve of her lips, the way her fingers would trace patterns on the porch rail. He had spent decades imagining her anger, her scorn, the words she might hurl at him. But now, confronted with reality, he realized she had carried none of that, only quiet hope. He pressed the envelope to his heart, tears welling, and whispered, barely audible, "I'm so sorry, Clara. I should have come back. I should have stayed." The porch beneath his hands felt solid, grounding him even as the past threatened to engulf him. Walter imagined her voice again, soft and forgiving. "It's okay. I never stopped caring." The words were not present, yet they resonated in his chest, bridging the decades he had lost. Walter stood, feeling a strange mix of grief and clarity. He could not undo what had been done. He could not walk back into her arms or rewrite history. But the confrontation he had feared all these years was not about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, about facing the consequences of a life lived without courage at a crucial moment. He walked to the edge of the porch, gazing out at the yard where she had once tended flowers, the field where they had picnicked in the summer, and the driveway where he had kissed her goodbye, oblivious of the heartbreak he was leaving behind. Every detail, every memory, was a reminder that life moves on, relentless and impartial. He sank into the chair Clara had once claimed, letting himself sit in the absence, in the void her passing had left behind. He unfolded the envelope, reading her words again. "Walter, you walked away angry, but I never stopped caring. If you ever want to talk, you know where my mother's house is. I'll wait a little while." The simple, quiet patience of her message cut through the years of imagined recrimination. No anger, no blame, only love and understanding. And in that understanding, Walter found both sorrow and peace. He bowed his head, tears spilling freely now, and allowed himself to mourn, not only for her, but for the man he had once been. He whispered to the empty porch, to the wind, to the memory of Clara, "I was foolish. I let pride win. I let time slip through my fingers. And for that, I am sorry, always sorry." The afternoon light softened, casting a golden glow over the house and field beyond. Wind chimes stirred gently, creating a delicate melody that seemed almost like a response, a benediction from the past. Walter closed his eyes, letting the emotions wash over him. The grief, the longing, the regret, and finally, a fragile hope. He understood now that confrontation was not about changing the past. It was about facing it honestly, about carrying the lessons forward. Walter Hayes had finally come to terms with the choices he had made, the people he had lost, and the love that had endured in memory. For the first time in decades, he felt a strange, quiet release. The confrontation was over, yet the journey had not ended. It had simply moved forward, toward understanding, toward peace, and toward the possibility of healing the relationship still within his reach. Walter stood slowly, the porch beneath him creaking in protest, and gazed at the horizon, letting the golden light fill his eyes and heart. This confrontation, heavy with grief and love, had reshaped him. Though Clara was gone, she had given him one last gift, the courage to live fully with the time that remained. After leaving Clara's empty porch behind, Walter Hayes didn't speak. He didn't even turn the key in the ignition until the weight of the moment had pressed itself fully onto his chest. The truck's engine hummed to life, familiar and grounding, yet every mile seemed slower than the last. He drove through winding country roads that he had traveled countless times in youth, each one now a ribbon connecting memory with present, regret with possibility. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, spilling a warm orange glow across fields of tall grass. Walter pulled over near a wide, open meadow, the same one where he and Clara had once picnicked as young lovers. He climbed out of the truck, the grass brushing against his pants as he walked toward the field, letting the stillness envelop him. This was a world untouched by screens, notifications, or the endless rush of modern life. Here, time was measured in the sway of the grass, the sound of a lone bird's song, and the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. Sitting on the hood of his truck, Walter unfolded the envelope once more. The words on the page were unchanged, yet they resonated differently now. Walter, you walked away angry, but I never stopped caring. If you ever want to talk, you know where my mother's house is. I'll wait a little while. The simplicity of the message was both painful and comforting. She had waited, in spirit if not in presence, for the man she had once loved, carrying no anger, no bitterness, only patience and understanding. Walter's chest ached with the knowledge that he had squandered the gift of time, that the choice he had made decades ago had irreversibly altered 2 lives. He pressed his hand to his heart, feeling the rhythm of a pulse that had been both a companion and his reminder for years. He whispered aloud, voice low, almost swallowed by the vastness of the meadow, "Clara, I didn't forget you. I just thought I had time. I thought tomorrow would always come." Tears pricked his eyes, blurring the horizon into a watercolor of gold and green. Walter thought of all the mornings, the afternoons, the evenings he had allowed to slip by. He thought of the arguments he had avoided, the words he had never said, the love he had never fully expressed. And yet, in this quiet moment of reflection, he also understood something vital. The past was unchangeable, but it teach, guide, and reshape the present. Walter's mind wandered to his own children. They were grown now, scattered across different cities, their lives busy, complicated, and, at times, distant. He realized with startling clarity that in his grief over Clara, he had neglected the very relationships he could still nurture. The patterns of absence, silence, and unspoken expectations had repeated themselves. He had become, in subtle ways, the same man who had once pushed away the person he loved most. He breathed deeply, letting the cool evening air fill his lungs, grounding him. The grief for Clara was sharp, undeniable, but was joined now by a growing sense of purpose. He could not undo the past with her, but he could honor it by living differently, by speaking his truths, by embracing the people still within reach. Walter ran a hand along the hood of the truck, feeling the worn leather beneath his fingertips. Each scratch, each dent, carried the weight of a lifetime lived, mistakes included. The truck had been a witness to countless memories, some joyous, some sorrowful, but had always endured. He imagined himself as a truck, carrying forward, bearing the scars of continuing the journey, and he felt a quiet determination rising within him. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the field, Walter reflected on the nature of time. Life did not truly run too fast. People simply failed to recognize its speed until years had stacked themselves behind them, until regrets had grown like shadows that stretched long and cold across the heart. The world had moved on, yes, but the lessons it offered, the lessons of love, of courage, of forgiveness, remained waiting for those willing to notice. He let his gaze sweep across the horizon, the trees, the distant hills, the soft colors of evening. They seemed to whisper to him, urging him to carry forward what he had learned, to speak before silence became permanent, to love before absence became inevitable, to forgive and seek forgiveness while the door remained open. For the first time in decades, Walter felt a measure of peace, not the false comfort, denial, or avoidance, but a calm that comes from honest reckoning with life's choices. He could mourn Clara, yes, but he could also honor her memory by changing the way he approached the time he still had. Rising from the hood of his truck, he walked slowly back toward the vehicle, the envelope safely tucked in his jacket pocket. His steps were measured, deliberate, each one affirming the resolve that had begun to grow inside him. The reflection he had engaged in this quiet meadow had clarified the path forward. He could not reclaim lost decades, but he could reclaim presence, attention, and love in the moments still available. Sitting back in the driver's seat, Walter started the engine, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was no longer just a path through space, but a path toward connection, reconciliation, and healing. He whispered one final thought into the evening air, a vow to himself. I will not wait any longer. I will live what remains fully, with courage, with honesty, and with love. And with that, Walter Hayes drove on, carrying both the weight of the past and the promise of the present, ready to face the people who still mattered and to mend what could still be mended. The journey of reflection had ended, but the journey of life, now with intention, was just beginning. Walter Hayes had driven home slowly, savoring every turn of the familiar roads that led to the house where his children had grown. The old blue pickup rumbled steadily beneath him, its worn seat comforting, a reminder of decades spent in steady routine. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, warm streaks across the countryside, and for the first time in years, Walter felt the tension in his chest soften, replaced by a cautious hope. He parked in the driveway and lingered a moment, gazing at the house where countless memories, some joyous and some painful, had been built. The porch was empty, the swing gently swaying in the evening breeze. He remembered the first time he had brought his children home from the hospital, the evening spent reading stories by lamplight, the laughter echoing down these very halls. But he also remembered the distance that had grown over the years, how work, pride, and stubbornness had made him absent, leaving gaps in their lives that no passing of time could fully erase. Walter took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath his feet. The familiar scent of home, old wood, fresh laundry, and the faint trace of garden soil filled his senses. He rang the doorbell, feeling a flutter of anxiety he hadn't experienced in decades. What would they say? Would they forgive him? Would they even want to see him after all the years he had been distant? The door opened and his eldest daughter, Emily, stood there, her expression cautious but curious. She was taller than he remembered, her eyes reflecting the mix of childhood familiarity and adult responsibility. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, Walter lifted his hand in a small, tentative wave. "Dad!" Emily's voice was soft, uncertain. Walter's throat tightened. "Emily, I've been away in ways I shouldn't have, and I've let too much time slip by. I'm sorry." Her eyes glistened, a mixture of surprise and emotion. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. "Come in," she whispered. "We've missed you." Inside, the house was warm, filled with the gentle bustle of evening. His younger son, David, emerged from the kitchen, carrying a plate of cookies for the children who had been playing quietly in the living room. The grandchildren's eyes widened as Walter entered, and for the first time in years, he felt the pulse of life around him, the warmth, the chaos, and the laughter he had once cherished. Walter knelt down, meeting his youngest granddaughter at eye level. "Hello there," he said, voice tender. "I've missed you." She hesitated for a moment before rushing into his arms, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. The moment broke something inside him, a dam of emotion that had built over decades. Tears came unbidden, warm and real, as he held her close. Sitting together in the living room, Walter shared stories from the past, old family memories interspersed with anecdotes he had long kept to himself. He laughed when he remembered small embarrassments, apologized for past mistakes, and listened as his children shared their own experiences and feelings, some tinged with hurt, some with joy. The evening stretched on, filled with quiet conversations, the smell of homemade bread from the kitchen, and the soft sound of the children playing. Walter realized that while some gaps could never be fully closed, the active presence, of being there, of acknowledging the past, was the first step toward mending the fractures time had left. He looked around the room, taking the faces of his children, their spouses, and grandchildren. The weight of years of absence began to lift, replaced by something fragile, yet incredibly powerful: connection. He understood that reconciliation was not an event but a process, and it began with honesty, humility, and love. Later, as night settled over the house, Walter stepped outside to the porch. The stars hung low, the cool evening air brushing against his face. He thought of Clara, the letter, the confrontation that had reshaped him, and he whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for teaching me that love, even when lost, can guide us to those who remain." In that moment, Walter felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in decades. The resolution wasn't about undoing the past. It was about embracing the present, cherishing the people still in his life, and allowing himself to love without hesitation. He returned to the living room, where Emily and David sat quietly, sharing a rare moment of calm after the evening's laughter and storytelling. "Dad," Emily said softly, "it's good to have you home." Walter smiled, a mixture of relief and quiet pride. "It's good to be home," he replied, and for the first time, the words felt complete, resonant with truth. As he looked around the room, he realized that life's journey was not defined solely by regrets or mistakes, but by the courage to face them and the willingness to continue moving forward. The past had been a teacher, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, but always necessary. And in this small, familiar house filled with the warmth of family, Walter Hayes understood that redemption, love, and connection were still possible, if only one had the courage to pursue them. The evening drew to a close, the soft glow of lamps casting long, comforting shadows across the walls. Walter settled into his chair, watching the family around him, feeling the heartbeat of a life reclaimed through presence, reflection, and love. He had faced the past, embraced the lessons it offered, and now, at last, he could step into the future with a quiet, unshakable resolve. The days following Walter's return were slow, filled with quiet rhythms and gentle rediscovery. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to linger in moments rather than rush through them. He watched the sun rise over the field behind his house, its warm light spilling into the living room, illuminating the faded photographs and memories lining the walls. The world had not slowed. Children still ran. Phones still pinged. But within the sanctuary of his home, time felt malleable, generous, and forgiving. Walter's mornings began with coffee on the porch, his old ceramic mug warming his hands as he observed the garden and the winding road beyond. His grandchildren tumbled to the yard, laughter echoing through the crisp air. Birds flitted across the trees, their songs carrying a sense of timelessness. Walter found himself smiling more, not at anything spectacular, but at the simple wonder of life itself. The laughter of children, the scent of grass after morning dew, the quiet hum of a world moving forward without notice. He spent time reconnecting with his children in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Long walks, quiet conversations, and shared meals became the rhythm of their days. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing stories of triumph, struggle, and daily life that he had missed over the years. And he spoke, too, about love, about mistakes, about regrets, and about hope. Every word was deliberate, heartfelt, a bridge spanning decades of distance and silence. One evening, Walter found himself on the porch, the envelope with Clara's letter resting beside him. He read it again, letting the words settle in his mind. Walter, you walked away angry, but I never stopped caring. If you ever want to talk, you know where my mother's house is. I'll wait a little while. Though Clara was gone, the letter remained a reminder of life's quiet lessons, the power of patience, forgiveness, and the enduring presence of love. Walter pressed the envelope to his chest, whispering softly, "Thank you, Clara, for waiting, for caring, for teaching me." The porch swing creaked as he leaned back, eyes scanning the yard where his grandchildren played. His daughter Emily called him to come inside for dinner, and they scampered toward the house, their energy endless, their joy contagious. Walter smiled, feeling the weight of years lighten with every step, every laugh, every small moment of connection. He thought of the journey he had undertaken, not just the miles traveled, but the emotional path that had carried him through grief, regret, and reflection. He had confronted the past, acknowledged mistakes, and found reconciliation where he could. He had faced the absence of love he had failed to nurture and transformed it into presence, patience, and devotion for those who still surrounded him. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Walter allowed himself to simply be. There were no urgent tasks, no looming deadlines, no obligations that mattered more than this. The quiet beauty of family, the soft passage of time, the gentle reminder that life, though fleeting, could still hold meaning and joy. He watched as his grandchildren ran past, chasing a stray ball, their laughter mingling with the hum of cicadas and the distant call of a crow. Each sound, each movement, became a part of the tapestry of his homecoming, a tapestry woven with love, forgiveness, and a deliberate choice to be present. Walter reached for his cup of coffee, now cold but comforting, and felt the embrace of peace settle around him. He realized that homecoming was more than returning to a physical place. It was the act of returning to oneself, to love, and to connection. It was about walking toward the people who mattered, even when time had created distance. It was about understanding that the world, in all its speed and change, still had space for hearts willing to engage with it fully. The wind stirred through the trees, rustling the leaves and carrying the faint scent of late-blooming flowers. Walter closed his eyes, listening to the subtle symphony of life around him, the voices of his children, the laughter of grandchildren, the whisper of wind, and the distant call of evening birds. In that moment, everything felt complete. He whispered a final thought into the evening air, a cinematic reflection that captured the journey of a lifetime. Sometimes the road home is the hardest one to take, but it's always worth every step. Walter leaned back in the porch swing, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The house behind him glowed with warmth, the yard alive with life, and the world, though fast, unyielding, and ever-changing, felt welcoming once more. He had returned not just to a place, but to love, to understanding, and to himself. And as the last light of the sun kissed the horizon, Walter Hayes finally understood that life's most meaningful journeys are not measured in distance, but in courage, reflection, and the choice to embrace what remains. The past had shaped him, the present had healed him, and the future, though unknown, was filled with the promise of connection, presence, and enduring love.